It's Friday, June 20th, 2025. I'm Heath Lambert, and the biggest story of the week is the conflict in Iran.
President Trump is meeting with his national security team regarding the escalating situation in the Middle East. Israel and Iran have traded strikes for a fourth day. Israel says it attacked the headquarters of Iran's state television today, which was captured during a live broadcast.
This is the moment Israel targeted Iranian state TV live on the air. The terrified anchor running for cover as smoke and debris filled the studio. The building up in flames. This reporter with bloodied hands rushing outside, blasting Israel's attack.
Last Friday, June 13th, Israel launched Operation Rising Lion, dropping hundreds of bombs on the nation of Iran, destroying nuclear facilities and killing dozens of Iranian leaders. Israel took this action in response to the failure of peace talks with Iran and out of concern that the rogue nation was getting dangerously close to possession of a nuclear weapon. In a particularly daring element of the plan, agents from the Israeli intelligence service smuggled drones deep into Iran, which were used to destroy many Iranian air defenses. Since then, we have seen expanding attacks as Iran has shot missiles into Israel, the United States has strengthened its military presence in the region, and Israel has promised that the attacks will continue until it has eliminated Iran's ability to produce a nuclear weapon. Much of the news coverage, perhaps most of it, is about scary things that may happen. Will the United States get drawn into another costly and protracted war? Will the regional conflict with Iran expand to a global war? Will Israel pursue regime change? These questions are as understandable as they are unanswerable right now. My commitment on the biggest story of the week is to deal with the headlines as they are, not the headlines as they might be. We'll cross the bridge of those potential headlines when and if we get to them. For now, we face a serious and deadly conflict that has been brewing for a long time. The conflict, as it currently exists, is more than enough for us to process this week. The situation, as it exists right now, requires at least two reflections on conflict. The first reflection is that conflict is profoundly unpleasant. Conflict, especially military conflict, involves the painful loss of energy, money, time, and human life. That rather obvious reality is behind much of the news related to Iran in the past week. The unpleasant loss inherent in conflict is what makes so many nervous and afraid of the current moment. We hear garden-variety Americans expressing reservations because they're worried about getting into a conflict which they say is none of our business. We hear relatives of service men and women expressing concern because they are worried about their loved ones entering danger. We hear government officials warning about involvement in this conflict because they fear bearing responsibility if and when things go wrong. There are indeed many concerns to weigh because all conflict is horrifyingly unpleasant. But the second reflection about conflict is that it is also unavoidable. This reality is as tragic as it is true. Conflict is a certainty in a sinful world. This is true in your life, family, job, and friendships. And it is true in global politics. Conflict has been a part of international relations for the entirety of human history and will continue to be until the end of history. This obvious reality helps us to face our understandable fears regarding the profound unpleasantness of conflict. The reality of conflict is not in doubt. The only question is whether the forces of wickedness will use conflict to impose their corrupt desires on the innocent, or whether the forces of righteousness will use conflict to thwart the wicked. The wicked leadership of Iran has been committed to the destruction of Israel and America since they began their corrupt reign in 1979. For 45 years, their desire to destroy has never been limited by a principled desire for peace, but only by a practical lack of means to do what they most desire. The practical limitation on their desire to destroy would be immediately removed by the possession of a nuclear weapon which they are trying to create. President Trump has repeatedly warned that Iran cannot be allowed to possess a nuclear weapon precisely because he understands the unavoidable nature of conflict. It is right for righteous forces to initiate a conflict with Iran before that wicked regime has the capability to initiate a nuclear conflict with the free world. None of this means that a conflict with Iran is necessarily the responsibility of the United States. Right now, the President, the National Security Council, the Department of Defense, and many others are processing information that we don't have to make decisions about how to best eliminate the Iranian threat. We need to pray for them to have wisdom to make decisions about whether, when, and how to enter a dangerous conflict with much at stake. But the certainty of conflict in a sinful world does mean that someone has the responsibility to engage in this fight. The certainty of conflict means that it is better for the righteous to fight now than to face the potential of a nuclear conflict later. The certainty of conflict means that responsible people do not have the freedom simply to wish we lived in a world less dangerous than the one we've got. Wishful thinking like that will only lead to a world where the bad guys are in charge. Just ask anyone in Ukraine. Romans 5:10 says that while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son. That passage speaks about the most significant conflict in human history. It's the conflict between sinful people and their righteous Creator. In his great love, God was not content to leave this conflict in place and allow humanity to remain his enemies. Instead, he entered the conflict with the omnipotent force of the righteous life of his glorious Son, who died on the cross, so that all who trust in him could know the end of conflict and live in harmony with him forever. God used the righteous force of his Son to end the conflict between sinners and himself. It is the reality of this cosmic conflict that gives us hope and courage in the midst of the current conflict in Iran. That is this week's biggest story. I can't wait to see you next Friday as we look at next week's biggest headline.